Alright guys, let's go ahead and get started for today. So, actually this may be, we'll see if this is a more controversial topic or not. I don't think it is, and I don't feel like most people that I talk to it is, but you never know. I'm sure somebody will disagree with this. And if you do, feel free to jump in the comments and let's talk about it. But what are we actually talking today? So what if I told you that there is probably like a single change that you could probably make to your D&D game, more importantly your gaming table, that would make combats faster, that would make roleplay deeper, that would make your prep easier as a dungeon master or game master, that would cost fewer cancellations of your games, and you could actually have campaigns that were more likely to cross the finish line, to actually fully book in and fully complete. Now that's still a starry-eyed dream, but I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of campaigns that just don't peter out. But this will give you a much better chance of actually getting that across the finish line, or that has been my personal experience anyways. And the best part is that you don't need like a new tool. There's not any more specific rules that you need to do, or about necessarily getting more players. In fact, it's actually the opposite of that last one, is that if you want these things, you should actually have fewer seats at your table as a dungeon master or game master. So today we're going to talk about what I consider to be the ideal number of players for a D&D group. And as you might expect, it's not going to be the standard assumption. Why don't we just go ahead and jump into it? It's going to be mainly a talking head video today. We're just going over a very, very simple thing, so not a lot of visual stimuli. So perfect second monitor content today. Depending on how long this takes, maybe we'll do something later. But this may take a while. Sometimes you get that feeling, and I think today's going to be one of those. We'll see how fast I go through this. Get through my notes. So, the standard advice for D&D is that it plays best with an adventuring party of about 4 to 5 characters in your adventuring party. So 4 to 5 players and 1 DM, Dungeon Master. I've been playing and running games for decades across the different editions of D&D and different other TTRPGs, and I have never found that to be that number of players to be the correct case. I've never found that 5 or 6 people at the table really being the ideal number, regardless of what system I'm playing, honestly. Despite D&D kind of like baseline assumption and that nostalgia for that inherent design of, the core classes, you get your fighter, your cleric, your rogue, your magic user, your wizard. I don't find 4 to be that right number for me. And I've run D&D for groups of all sizes. We're talking from like solo, like just doing it by myself, to duet games with only a single other, like long-running campaign with only one player in it, all the way up to running for like 8 people at the table at a time pretty consistently. And across that many different groups that I've played with, I've found that the one ideal number of players for my table, and I think it's not specific to my table because I have seen it work so well, whether I am the player or the dungeon master or game master for that group, and that's running for 3-player groups. So let me break down why I think we should probably be running for fewer people as dungeon masters and game masters, and why that would be actually a good thing, not a bad thing. So before we jump into that, if you haven't been here before, hey, this is the Red Ragged Fiend YouTube channel. We generally talk about D&D and other TTRPG stuff. So if you like this, we got a bunch of other videos. Check those out. There's also a blog over at redraggedfiend.com. There's other stuff down in the description if you want to keep up with us on other ways, as well as some pay what you want products that are up on DriveThruRPG and all kinds of fun stuff. Long backlog of many years. You can go check it out. It's tons of fun and figure out stuff. Whether if you're a dungeon master, and I have stuff that's more player focused too. If you want that for yourself, or something you want to pass along to your players. Yeah, I guess that's probably enough self promo, I guess. So let's kind of jump into it. So the first thing that kind of jumps out is that kind of been a very topic du jour lately in D&D last few years. Has been, hey, D&D, for the last 5 years or so, has been more popular than it's ever been before. I think that popularity is waning some. and then in this sort of post-pandemic world, but it is still very popular. And specifically, the 5th edition 2024 rules is the reason why this edition has been around for a decade, which is a long time as far as D&D rule lifespans, editions lifespans go. It's quite long now. Definitely not a short one. And one of the things that keeps kind of coming up again and again, this kind of rotating topic, is that D&D has a dungeon master shortage. Like, that's the problem. That's the thing that's really keeping D&D from being even more popular than it already is. That's the thing that's keeping people from playing D&D who want to play D&D. So we hear that again and again and again. But I've argued, and that's again what we're talking about a little bit today, is that it's not that D&D has too few DMs, it has too many players. You're like, well, that shouldn't be a bad thing, right? We want more people in the hobby, we want more people to play the game, we want more games to play. We want that sort of circle of life to keep feeding back into itself, to have that synergy that keeps feeding itself in growth. And if we want to see D&D continue to be popular and expand, it's not about kicking people out of the hobby or doing any sort of like weird gatekeeping or anything like that. And it's about asking the people who want to be part of the hobby to invest into the hobby, back into the hobby that they're getting stuff out of. And not just people who want to take from it in a very consumeristic kind of stance. And me having to manage myself as a resource for the group of people that I play D&D with. Because that's what we are as a Dungeon Master, is that we are a resource for these people. And it's about creating healthier boundaries and sticking to them to set yourself up for long-term success as a Dungeon Master. And I think the easiest way, if you ever want to see this in action, is go to like the subreddit LFG or any place where people are looking for groups, D&D groups. You will find and compare the ratio of how many people are looking for groups or how many D&D groups are looking for a Dungeon Master compared to the number of Dungeon Masters that are searching for groups. And you will find that that ratio is very uneven. You have a lot more people who are looking for, you have groups of entire people who are like, we want to play D&D, or we've been playing D&D for a long time, but we don't have a Dungeon Master. Which to me is often very short coded speak for, hey, we've burned out a Dungeon Master before, or we have been such a bad group that they don't want to play with us anymore. That's not always the case, right? People move or get busy or whatever. But it also means that, you might have anywhere from, as we know, 4 to 8 people who are just like, well, I just refused a Dungeon Master. And that's kind of the bigger issue that I'm getting to. So us as Dungeon Masters, we're a very in-demand resource, is what I'm saying. We need to value and protect ourselves thusly, so that way we can keep doing it. We burn ourselves out trying to do this, continuing to run for large groups, which I think is a lot more common now than it was probably even 5 years ago. I come across, now I feel like every time that I'm looking at stuff online, and so many people are like, well, I'm running for 7 people. And you're like, okay, if you continue to run for these large groups of minimally invested players, where you as the Dungeon Master have to shoulder the 80% of the load of the game, and then the last 20% is divided up between 8 different people, 8 different people, we're enabling those people to have fun essentially at the expense of our own fun. And each player that we add to a table is a multiplier on how difficult it becomes to run and prep the game. It's very different when you're trying to, as somebody who's run for like a duet game, where you only have one player character and the prep is so focused around that one player character and the specifics of what they're doing. It's so, I guess the term would be easy. It is easy because it's so laser focused. It's not easy, it's simple, let's put it that way. It's not complex. Trying to do prep where everybody feels like they get equal screen time and trying to like bounce that around with 7 or 8 players is really, really difficult. Significantly more difficult than doing just the standard 4 players, which is already somewhat difficult. You're already saying, hey, in a 4-hour session, each of you are going to get a max of basically 1 hour of kind of limelight. is when I'm trying to balance that. But in addition to everything else that's going on, that's probably going to be closer to about 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes of very specific for you limelight, and then everything else is going to be kind of a mixed bag, mixed up between everybody else. And combats and things like that where the plot has to move, because again, you're the only one who's sort of investing into the game, so you have to also provide ways for the plot to move forward that's not based off the characters leading the charge in any kind of way, which it tends to be more standard way of playing and running D&D now than I think it used to be, or certainly for sure than it used to be, where things were a lot more player focused, like character driven versus plot driven. And adding on top of that is that D&D has become a lot more complex over its history. Early D&D, it's super easy for a dungeon master to run sessions for a dozen players. Even more, there's lots of things where you look back in those early days where you have just beyond sort of like the Gygax era, where you have people who are running for a dozen plus players. And that was much easier to do. The characters are simpler, the mechanics are simpler, the rulings are simpler, the game is simpler. It's very specific. You go to the dungeon, you plumb the dungeon, you get the loot, you go back home, rinse and repeat, do it over and over again. And in addition to that, there was also helpful mechanics that were built for that. There were helpful player-side organization like the caller, which is essentially you have a team leader. There's like one person who basically has the talking stick who can speak back and forth with Dungeon Master, and it's their job to herd all the cats of the players and be like, okay, this is what everybody's going to do during their turns, because turns don't work. It's not like individual initiative, so turns are slightly different in old D&D, which also helps to organize everybody. Where you have side-based initiative, where it's like, oh, all the bad guys go, then all the characters go, and so then you're just outlining each character's action in the stack, essentially. So compare that to today, where the DMs are expected to shoulder the majority of the game in all aspects with very little assistance from most other players. As such, running for even larger than standard groups, once you start getting above 4 and 5 players, expedites that DM burnout and discourages new people from stepping into that DM seat and starting their own Dungeon Master journey, because they see how complex and often stressful the role can become for their Dungeon Master. And that's before you consider things like that have changed the perception of Dungeon Mastering, things like the Matt Mercer effect, etc., which we're not going to talk about here. But that is when it's like, oh, when you see, it's like saying like, oh, well, I've watched I don't know, like I've watched the NBA. I've seen professional basketball on TV, so I can't go out and shoot hoops. That's kind of what you're saying. It's very similar to the Mercer effect. I can't go shoot like a pickup game of basketball with my friends because I won't be like a LeBron James, because I'm not playing to that level. It's like, well, yeah, of course not. You're not a professional at doing it. That doesn't mean that it won't be fun. Not the same thing. So when we pull back a little bit and we look at smaller tables, because smaller tables provide less pressure on us as a dungeon master and less pressure for someone to jump in and try their hand as being a dungeon master, because there's, as we talked about, every time you add a player, prep and running becomes exponentially more difficult to do. So if we remove those exponents, we can really make it relatively simple. So you've got those fewer expectations, you've got this reduced social pressure around it. There are fewer role interactions just because you have fewer people of different classes and things like that you're going to have to worry about. And you're going to have this reduced amount of actual prep you need to do, as well as this sort of inherent perfectionism sometimes we put on ourselves when we're trying to step into the Dungeon Master seat, where we're especially the new person trying to get into the role, and you're like, I gotta do it perfect. It's got to be great. I don't want to make any mistakes. I don't want to, embarrass this or screw this up for other people. And be like, look, if you are willing to run the game, you're already light years ahead of most players, above players who refuse to run games. You're already like light years ahead of them, so they're happy that somebody's just gonna give them a game to play. especially when we're talking about a lot of D&D players here, like I said, are very minimally invested. So it's like they're not going to put in a lot of effort. So just having an open seat for them is generally enough. It leads to a lot of other problems that I think we see about like group smashing and things like that, but that is the primary thing that we want to look at that as far as today. So if you would have players, like we're saying, who would rather not play than at least attempt to run a one-shot, they're probably just not that invested in the hobby. That's a good sort of benchmark. Is a nice litmus test to be like, hey, this player. And here's the thing: is there's a big difference between somebody who this is their first game of D&D and they played like 4 sessions and they're like, yeah, I'm not ready to run anything, or somebody who's like, oh no, I've been playing for, anywhere from like 1 to 5 years, and be like, oh, but I could never run a game. And it's like, you should be able to, but presumably you've played the game enough that you should know the rules. So all you're doing is swapping out classes essentially for a player class to now a DM class. And it's like, you can do it. It's, you know the rules, you can do this. You've seen what success looks like. You've seen over the years what success doesn't look like when it doesn't happen. You've seen some failures for sure. You'd be like, oh well, maybe we should have done this instead. So that's when I look at that. That's a great litmus test for a player who's going to be invested in your game in general. If they're willing to step into the seat, and again, you're not saying this like, hey, can you run a 1 to 20 level campaign? You're like, no, can you step in, between the group once every, depending on how often you meet, once every like 2 to 3 months, and be like, hey, can you run a one shot? And if you can't run a one shot with like 2 to 3 months of prep beforehand, like a low level one shot, it's like you're probably not trying. You're not trying to run that one shot, which is very different than trying and failing. So when we talk about groups, if we're talking about a smaller group, that smaller group creates a greater sense of shared responsibility at the table, is what I've found. That it's, in fact, as DMs, we should have our players agree to running that one shot or some sort of standalone adventure on a repeating schedule to help us combat that DM fatigue, that DM burnout that's often common because we're doing so much of that heavy lifting. Like, you want to have people who are more invested, who are more ready to do prep, and people who are able to step in to ensure that the game, as like a group of people getting together, continues to play, even if I'm not ready. If I need an extra week to prep something because the week was busy and I just didn't have a chance. I had too much work or homework or a family emergency or whatever, and I didn't get the prep done. I'm just not going to be ready for today's game. Is there's somebody who can step in and run like a one shot or something? And I can play, and then I'll have another week to finish up my prep, and we'll do it then. Very simple way. It can help combat that DM fatigue and move the group towards that ideal. What we think of is that Valhalla, that Shangri-La, I should say. That Shangri-La for Dungeons and Dragons, which is that you have an entire group of Dungeons and Dragons players that are all dungeon masters. Like, that's the Shangri-La. That's what you want. This thing where it's like, oh, and then everybody runs something, and then everybody gets a chance to play, and everybody gets a chance to run. Because most dungeon masters do want to play. There are the few weirdos out there who really only want to run games and don't really enjoy playing as much. Great to have, but even forever DMs get burned out. There's not. We can tell it. There's not a positive connotation with the term associated with the term forever DM. It's almost always used in a negative context. So take that for what it's worth. So finding that group that would have like that rotating DMs, again, just only needs to be like the occasional one shot or like small adventure, published adventure. Don't even have to homebrew anything, make anything up on your own. Would help to expedite separating the wheat, that is our participation focused players, the players who are investing in the game, who are helping the game as the sort of social group continue to happen, versus the chaff, which I think of now as very consumer focused players who look at D&D as something that they only get something out of and they don't pour anything back into, which is not What they're asking for is a service. Those players are asking for a service, not a hobby. A hobby is something you pour a lot of time into, that you pour yourself into. That is one of the defining features of a hobby. Whereas having somebody just do something for you, that is by definition a service. You're asking somebody to do something for that. And as Dungeon Masters, most of us, most of the time, are not getting paid in any sort of way. So if you're providing this incredible free service to all the people around you and they're not giving anything back into you because you're treating it as a hobby and they're treating it as this sort of consumer focused service, you're gonna have that burnout. You're not gonna be happy with your game. What we want to do is we want to get the former sorting themselves out of the group. The latter sorting themselves out of the group. The people who are only here, who only think about D&D as they're basically getting to the D&D game, and then when they finish the D&D game, they put their character sheet away and they don't think about it until the next week, till an hour before the next game, in a week or a month or however often you play. Like, those are the people that long term are not going to put a lot back into your hobby. They're not going to help you fill your cup back up with your energy and your excitement for the game. They're not going to do that. And by setting up a tone where it's like, oh, everybody agrees when you're playing in this group that you will run something on a kind of regular basis. It doesn't have to be, frequency can be different, but that you will do it regularly. So there's a big difference. We're not saying that, every 3 weeks you have to run something, so you're going to end up running, a dozen games a year or something like that. No, it's more like, maybe you'll run like 2 to 4, maybe 6 at the super high end. Like, everybody's agreeing to do that throughout the year, so that way the DM can have extra time, have some breathing room, actually get an opportunity to play throughout the year. So that way they fill their cup back up, they protect themselves from burnout and are able to do those sorts of things. But there's also a lot more as to why I think 3 players is the perfect party size for D&D, outside of just this DM shortage burnout situation. I think that's a big portion of it. I think that's one of the reasons that I like it, is that you can really focus in, and it's much easier to get a very tight group of very like-minded people who are going to be as invested in the game as you are and excited for the game as you are. Which I think when you start ballooning up there and 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players, they can't all be equally invested. And even if they were all equally invested, just percentage-wise, that's so much lower than if you have 4 people at a table, 1 DM and 3 players, and everybody is 25% invested to make up the whole. Everybody's on the same page. And that's, I think, just it's been my experience, that's just better. Let's talk about some of the other things, other ways that 3 players specifically is better, because that's my ideal number. One of the first ones that comes up probably very, very often, and this is very dependent on the type of game you play, or the type of game you run. So for me, I don't have a super railroady style. I have a pretty open world, sandboxy kind of style. So the group has to make a lot of decisions about what they're going to do. When you have 3 players, that means that there's never going to be a hung decision. They're never not going to make a decision because half the group says A and half the group says B. There's 3, there's always somebody there's always going to be a tiebreaker. Which is incredibly helpful, which means that you don't get caught in as many just sort of circular arguments where people are trying to figure out what to do, and it's like, guys, it's just a fork in the dungeon. Either choose left or right. You have no idea what's down either way, because you're not checking, or you failed your checks or whatever. So kind of just pick one and go, man. Like, it's not that important. The truth is that if you're doing dungeon crawling, you're gonna go down both forks eventually, so it doesn't really matter which one you go down first if you don't have any way to make that meaningful choice. But yeah, I mean, so you're never going to have a split decision, which is very nice. That happens with any odd number, but especially with 3 people. One of the other things it does is that anytime that you have something that's like, oh, you need to make a decision or vote on something or come up with a plan, having fewer participants in it means that there's fewer points of communication that need to happen. Those smaller groups make decisions faster just in general. Obviously, when it comes down to playing something like a solo D&D game or a duet game where there's only one person who has to make the decision very quickly, 2 players, usually pretty quickly, but does have that same problem with all even-numbered player groups have, which is that 2 people can just disagree on what course of action to do, and then they'll either argue about it, one person will capitulate, or they will split up. And splitting the party is generally not a good idea, as we all know, as the rule of thumb says, but especially when those party splits are just 2 solo characters, things go a lot worse, typically. So generally don't want to do that. But this can also be super useful if you, mechanically, if you employ things like group ability or skill checks, where you're like, okay, well, everybody needs to pass half the party or better needs to pass a DC 13 stealth check or whatever to get past here. There's never going to be a split like you will have in even party group where 2 people fail and 2 people pass, and you're like, now I have to take like the median or the average, or just like hand wave it and be like, I guess only 50% of you got it, but I guess we'll count that as majority. With an odd number, you're always going to have more people pass or more people fail. Then you're never going to be hung in the middle again like that. For our spotlight allocation and getting more player engagement, with 3 PCs, every player gets significantly more scene time and engagement. And you go from, if we wanted to split it up, okay, we do some math real quick. So, standard group, there's 5 people at the table, so everybody basically gets 20% screen time, because we're going to include the DM in this. So 25% is kind of moving the plot along, and then each person gets like 25% of like, oh, my player's in the forefront doing their thing. They're picking the locks, they're talking to animals, they're deciphering the arcane runes, they're lifting the portcullis and bending the bars. So they're doing all that stuff. And then, of course, the DM is 25% like, oh, this is what you find in the room. Here are the monsters you have. Do you want to talk to these monsters? What are you guys going to do? Here's the plot that's kind of unfolding in front of you. Here's the items that you pick up, etc., etc. Now, if you take that down to just 4, everybody goes from having sort of 20% of spotlight to 25% of spotlight, which is a 25% per person increase in the amount of spotlight time that they get. So when you do that, every player gets pretty significantly more scene time and engagement, and that's assuming that they're doing things alone. As you get the parties get smaller and smaller, they will be more actively with each other and engaging with each other. I find that you have it much fewer scenes where you have player characters that are just kind of standing around in the background. Less likely to have scenes where one PC, steps forward, who's the face, and it's like, well, I do all the talking, and then all the 4 sit in the back, and be like, no, when there's only 3 PCs, and be like, look, anytime that you guys make a persuasion check or something like that, you guys are acting as a group, so all of you as a group need to persuade the person. You can't just have one person persuade the person, and then have 2 shifty people in the background who refuse to talk to that person. Like, no, you kind of all have to pass the vibes check. And that's much easier to do with 3 characters. It's easy to pull them into a social scene and have even just like 2 NPCs, each kind of individually engaging with different PCs and having different conversations kind of at the same time in a scene. Without somebody who's like, oh, well, here's the talking scene for the bard, so I'm going to go to the bathroom and then doom scroll for 15 minutes, and then I'll be like, oh, what's happening? Did we got the thing? Okay, cool. So you'll get more engagement in that because even as a DM, it's much easier to engage all the players in that way. Another big thing, every time that you reduce a player from the group, speed kills, baby. The game goes much faster. You'll see, especially online, lots of people who lament about how slow D&D is, especially combat. So being able to create challenging combats with fewer creatures, with less total hit points across the board, fewer total turns for a combat, exponentially speeds up combat encounters. Combat encounters just go a lot faster. And with fewer PCs, as that combat resolves faster, that means that you can have social scenes that stay tight, because Instead of, like I said, if you're engaging all the players, that's still only 3 players. Very easy to do. Just asking each. All it takes is asking 3 different questions. Question to this PC, a question to this PC, a question to this PC. And suddenly everybody's engaged in that, and then you can just straight be done with that encounter, with that scene. And exploration choices tend to happen with momentum. There's not as much stalling and thinking about, oh, what are we going to do? There's significantly less skill check dogpiling. But you have fewer players at the table. There's fewer occasions where multiple PCs are going to be trained in the same skill. Now, of course, you're always going to have the thing where everybody's going to try to get proficiency in perception or something like that because it's an incredibly useful skill. But I mean, this is like, oh, well, there's not like 2 or 3 different people in the party who are probably trained in Arcana. And so when somebody rolls a 2 when they make their Arcana checks, you don't have the 2 other players jump forward and be like, can I make an Arcana check? That happens much, much less. Because those people are going to look at their character sheet and be like, I also don't have any Arcana, or my intelligence is dog, because of course it's our dump stat. So, as an example, I've been running a duet game. And I often end up prepping like way too much content for a standard 4-person session of campaign. Because the difference is between, in a duet game, when you only have the 1 player, they're lightning through content. They just burn through prep so quick. But in a standard 4-person session, I often forget when I'm prepping in between those 2 that they're so different, because when you're prepping for like a 4-player table, a rule of thumb that I've always found that works really good is about 45 minutes of playtime per encounter is a good rule of thumb when you're prepping for a standard D&D group. They're like, okay, well, if we're playing for 3 hours, that's about 4 different scenes, and that's about it. And that's assuming that we are like full on playing that entire time. But the truth is, and we'll get 3 hours of gameplay out of that. The truth is that most gameplay is really slow, especially once you start adding that there's more crosstalk. Somebody's clearly not paying attention, so you have to repeat stuff again, or the players have to catch up that last player who wasn't paying attention. And when you get more playtime at the table, you get more progression and narrative development for each session that you play. So each PC is going to get more spotlight. That means more meaningful development for them. There's also just the simple division of it all, is that the more PCs that you have in the campaign, the less impactful each individual PC is to the overall plot, and the less attention each of the PC's individual story beats or backstories get. So if you want to have more engagement for your character, and I think that is probably the biggest pull I feel for people who have come into the hobby through 5e in the last 10 years, really playing 5e in 2024, is that a lot of people kind of come in with that, not in a derogatory sense, but very sort of theatrical style of play that they've learned probably from streaming, from like a Critical Role or Dimension 20, watching actors essentially play D&D and being like, oh, well, that's what D&D must be. And that's a way to play D&D. It's not necessarily the right way to play D&D, or the wrong way to play D&D. But if you want that much attention, and you look at the Critical Role, and you look at Dimension 20, and you're like, oh, but they have player casts of 6, 7 plus sometimes. So that's perfectly doable, and you're like, you guys forget that is a full production. It is meant to be entertaining. It is not. They are not playing a game in the same way that you play the game at the table. They are purposefully being like, we are trying to create a narrative. This is the thing where it's like, you look at like Brennan Mulligan stuff, and he's like, oh, well, I have a beat of stories for the main plot, and then a beat of stories for each characters, and I talk with each player before the session about what character beat they want to hit in the session. There's a lot of planning that goes into it that doesn't go into a home game. And that's a lot of planning that the individual players do that, I gotta tell you, most D&D players are not doing. So they're not like, it's not necessarily the Matt Mercer thing effect of, oh, well, the DM just isn't of high enough quality. It's like, you guys are seeing a tenth of what goes on to make those shows happen. what you're not seeing is like the 6 hours of prep that Matt Mercer does, or whatever crazy stuff that it used to be. When we talked about it, was doing like 6 hours of prep for the show every week. Somebody who's putting the miniatures together, somebody who's building the battle board, somebody who's a official, like, paid on salary lore keeper for the show to keep everything straight, somebody who's helping build all the characters with all the players and doing all that stuff. And it's just like, it's very different. I feel like you can really see that in the progression of something like Dimension 20 as to what it is in the beginning as to what it is now, and see how differently it plays and how much smoother it plays now. It's like, oh, as they got more funding, as they got more people behind the scenes, campaigns get smoother and smoother and smoother and smoother in play. So, if you want that, if you want to have more investment in the game and you want to have more of that main character kind of energy, you want to be like, oh, this is my character and I have all this stuff and I have all these great ideas for them, you need more spotlight at the table. And the only way to get more spotlight at the table is to, in a bad game, take spotlight from somebody else. Is force your way into it. In a good game, it's like, well, we should just have fewer players and ensure that our players are more aligned. People who are at the table are more aligned about the type of game that we want and the story we want to tell together. Another benefit of having fewer players, just scheduling and consistency. Fewer players means fewer scheduling conflicts and more consistent sessions. Over on, I think it's SciShow, and what was it? A while back, Hank Green had a formula for how likely it was that you were going to be able to schedule a D&D game, and depending on like the number of people and their individual schedules that you can go check out. It's a silly math formula for figuring it out, and what it shows you very clearly is that the more players who are at your game, exponentially the less likely it is you'll be able to play. Fewer schedules to balance means more opportunities to play, which is always one of the thing that kills a campaign more often than not is scheduling. So the idea is that you want all your players to be occasional game runners, and so that means that even when there's only, like, say, 2 people available, they could still play, which is only 50% of the people available. They could still play a one-shot or a 2-player, like, GM-less game, like an Ironsworn kind of game or something. The idea is that the game will keep going when you set up a group like this, even if the DM is the one to cancel. The DM's like, I have a family thing or a work thing or whatever it is, so I'm not going to be able to play this week. And another player's like, yeah, actually, well, I actually have something else going on too. And then the 2 final people will be like, oh, well, you want to do like a GM-less like game? We can do like Ironsworn, or I've got this one shot I've been tooling around with. Do you want to do like a duet game real quick, just a one shot? It's just like we just run for one person. Stakes are really low. They're throwaway characters. You don't have to worry about them very much. The stakes are really low. Makes it very easy to step into that DMing seat. Much easier to work together with one other player as to the type of game that you're trying to make. It gives you a lot of leeway and a lot of grace when you're making mistakes, which you're going to make a lot of as a new DM. And that's okay. I mean, you're going to make mistakes. It's fine. That's kind of the point. The more you do it, the fewer mistakes you'll make. You'll make different mistakes for a long time. Hopefully not the same mistakes, and you're actually learning from your mistakes. So let's talk a little bit about like the standard 5e 2024 expectations for D&D. So many online and Dungeon Master guides say the sweet spot is 4 players. That's the classic party with your fighter and your cleric and your rogue and your wizard. That's the inherent design for published modules and encounter building math as far as D&D is concerned. Like, that is baked into the system. That is the assumption. Every player that gets added extends how long a scene lasts, as we talked about, especially combat and social scenes where everybody needs to talk and everybody needs to agree on things, or everybody needs an additional turn, which means that there's probably more monsters on the field to balance that person. So now every time that you add a new player to the game, oftentimes you're adding at least 1 or more new monsters to every combat. So now you're actually, for every person, adding 2+ turns per round of combat, which really starts to slow down combat very, very quickly. As DM, we're always trying to balance that spotlight, and that includes ensuring that that fourth PC gets time in the scene, even if it's unnecessary for the scene's progression. Like, you guys have killed the orcs in this dungeon chamber. You killed the orcs in the dungeon chamber, and you're starting to look around. Somebody's like, oh, I'm gonna go make the investigation check and look for stuff. Oh, I'm gonna loot the body. And then you have like the one character who's like, I don't have anything to do, so I guess I'll just keep watch. Ensure there aren't more orcs coming down the hallway. And then at some point you're just like, well, you need to swing back to that fourth character, even if nothing's going on. Even if you know that you made the roll, and you're like, well, nothing's coming. You do sometimes want to swing back and be like, okay, give me a perception check. Okay, you don't hear or see anything coming in your distance. Like, even that is just extra load for the DM. And that's not bad, it's just that it's already kind of a do nothing roll, but you also want them to feel like they're still part of it, right? Still want them to feel that way. Like they're still part of what's going on. A moment, please. Okay. Double checking. OBS was telling me something weird. But everything seems to be working just fine. So, sort of my counterpoint to that 4PC party thing is that one of the things that we love about D&D in general is that the idea is that you can try anything. That's one of the things that you always try to sell people on D&D is, right? It's like, it's a game, unlike a video game or something else, or a board game. It's like, if there's a way that a creative solution you can come up to a problem, is like, you can try that. And having fewer players and player characters at the table forces that creative problem solving to happen a lot more often. You can't fall back on those rote kind of role coverages, that tank, that control, that DPS, that healer aspects, because you're not going to be able to fill all those roles. The lack of role coverage is a feature, not a flaw of playing with only 3 player characters. Because that necessity is the mother of invention. Consider, like, if the party lacks a healer, how is the group going to deal with that? How are they going to deal with healing in and out of combat? Usually when you see this sort of stuff, often the advice is like, oh, well, you just need to give them more healing potions. And be like, no, I mean, I am here as a Dungeon Master to facilitate the game. I am here to ensure that you guys are put in a position in which you can be successful. It is not my role to be like, well, you guys don't need to worry about healing because I'm going to give you so many healing potions it'll never be an issue. Instead, it'd be like, you guys made characters, you all talked to each other, you guys all decided that nobody wanted to play the healer, so you have no healer. And then that is the hole that's in your party, which means that you need to come up with some sort of solution for that. Now, that solution could be, having the proficiency that allows you to brew potions. Having, taking the battle medic feat, and doing things like that. Other ways you can get around that. Picking up magic items that give you healing. Like, if you can get your hands on a wand of healing word. Something like that. So, another question we could ask is, like, how does the group approach combat if they don't have a frontliner? They don't have a barbarian, they don't have a paladin, they don't have a fighter, they don't have somebody who has a bunch of hit points and generally is hard to hit. Somebody who's supposed to stand there and take the blows. It doesn't mean that your party's bad, it just means that you're going to approach combat in a very, very different way. When you're like, oh, our battle plans are very different because we don't have somebody who can just take hits. So with a group like that, it's fighting a big solo monster can be a lot more difficult because they don't have somebody who's going to be able to stand in the front line and just take the blows from the big monster. The big monster will roll up on somebody, do a multi-attack, and be like, you go from perfectly fine to being like, you're in critical condition in one round, and you need to figure out how to spread that damage around. Or the sort of archetypes that you take for your 3 characters, you're like, well, I probably need to take, maybe I should take the toughness feat, or maybe I should focus on a way that I can get some higher armor class or better defenses, or maybe take proficiency in dex saves or anything like that. Gives you like the feats, the ability to sort of shore up things like that when you're like, I need to make sure that I have more survivability in combat than I normally would. Because I'm not going to have somebody who's going to step in front of me and take the hits for me. Because we don't have that in our group. So don't discredit the positive power of improvisation. Having a gap in proficiency should introduce fun challenges for your group that your players can overcome with their creative solutions, their one-off shenanigans. As DM, we can design more clearly the specific party's strengths when we want them to feel powerful, and weaknesses when they start getting a little overconfident. That's the nice thing about the holes, is that there will still be things that the party's really good at, and things that they're not good at. So let's say in that tank example, so they don't have a tank. That means that probably most of the characters are probably pretty stealthy. So if you want them to feel very powerful, you put them in situations, be like, hey, you can go through here, and as you, in this situation, you can sneak past a lot of challenges. And that's perfectly good. And so you want to make sure that you put obstacles or challenges in front of them that's like, this would be very easy to get past if you decide to use stealth. Now, at the same time, every once in a while, when they start getting a little overconfident, if they start being very, very successful about sneaking past everything, and they're not engaging in basically any other style of play, that's when you start putting in stuff that have like Tremor Sense or Blind Sight or True Vision. Things that they can't really sneak past. Or different challenges like, you can't sneak your way past a puzzle door. You're going to have to deal with the puzzle. Well, when you deal with the puzzle, there's a chance that monsters might come, patrolling monsters are going to come by that chamber. So if you don't do it really well, and you don't do it very quickly, then those monsters are going to come in, they're going to catch you, you're going to get into a combat that you're not necessarily wanting to get into. It's like when you have a group of players where nobody plays the face, and then you're like, oh, they keep smashing through all my combats. You're like, you should probably throw a social thing at them. Be like something that they can't kill their way out of, a problem they can't kill their way out of, or that killing in that context will only make things worse for them. This is one of the things where it's like, oh, they need to go to like the Duke's Ball or something like that, a masquerade, and that's what they need to do. And let them fumble around a little bit. Like, you still need to put them in a situation in which they can still potentially be successful out of, but also assume that there is a likelihood that they're not going to be very good at this, and that they can have some repercussions on it, or things can not go well for them, so that way that you can have a nice little downbeat in your campaign planning, or they go back to doing the stuff they're really good at, which are all generally upbeats, if they get the things they want. There's also, once you drop down from 4-player parties down to 3-player parties, the role dynamics change a whole bunch. Not everybody falls into those neat roles. So things are a little bit different. Each PC doesn't have to be, but can focus on a single tier play. That can be like, you can have one of the players be like, I'm going to build the face for all the social interactions to lead those. You're going to have the person who's like, well, I'm going to make the skill monkey for all our exploration kind of challenges and doing those sorts of things. The person who's going to be like, oh, I'm going to build the munchkin for our combat encounter, so I'm going to build the combat monster. And all 3 of those will feel like a good party together, where you basically have one person who leads the charge and then the other 2 kind of support that, so everybody feels like they have their own specific arena that they can play around in as far as the game is. And as long as you keep the gameplay focus between those 3 different pillars of gameplay, everybody's going to be happy with that. Assuming that something silly didn't happen, like the person who built the face wants to also mainly be combat. That's like, I chose sorcerer, and I said I'd do that to lead the social interactions, but really I just wanted to be the combat superstar. And I was like, okay, well, then this could be a little bit of an issue. If the person, and this happens, I find, more often than I think we'd like, is that when you have 3 different charisma-based casters in your rule system in D&D, The likelihood that somebody's playing a charisma-based character who doesn't want to do the social, isn't very interested in doing the social RP side of the game is significantly higher than I think probably any other aspect of the game in a similar situation. I'd be like, oh, I decided to play a ranger, but I actually don't want to do any sort of like exploring or investigation. I chose a rogue, but I don't really want to do any sort of like thieves tools things or checking for traps. I don't really want to do any of that stuff. Like, okay. So it does make things a little bit more difficult. But that in my experience has been a very specific charisma caster thing that tends to happen. But that's a little off topic. So when you drop down to just 3 people in the group, you can also split up the duties. So say that you have one PC who's going to take care of, going to be your insight person. You've got one PC who's going to be the person who's going to be the persuasion person, one PC who's going to be the deception person. So that way you can split up duties within the pillars instead of splitting up the pillars themselves. So it's like, oh, well now all 3 of these characters have a way to interact with in a meaningful way in any sort of social situation. Similarly, you can have one that's trained in investigation, one that's trained in arcana, one that's trained in survival. Great, any sort of exploration stuff we have going on, there's always going to be somebody who's going to be able to step to the front and be like, hey, I have a relevant skill proficiency for this thing, so I can lead us looking for the button for the secret door. I've got this person who can decipher these, whatever this arcane orrery is, whatever this gigantic piece of machinery is that seems magic. And another person who's like, hey, I can ensure that we can track down people with my survival. And then in combat, you can do like, oh, one person who focuses on buffs or debuffs, one person who focuses on defense, and another person who focuses on dealing the damage. So you can split it up very easily. It doesn't always have to be like, you're only going to do the social pillar stuff, you're only going to do the exploration pillar stuff, and you're only going to do the combat pillars. You can just switch up different roles within each one of those pillars very easily. I personally, this has been my experience, is that I find it to be a much richer D&D experience than the standard party falling into the stale optimizing party roles of tank and healer and DPS and control. Like, I just don't... I've been playing long enough that I don't find that to be particularly interesting. I felt like that got stale very, very quickly. Whereas, anytime that I play in a... Anytime that I play in a 3-player game, I feel like those holes within the group are so much more self-evident. They're so much clearer. And I think everybody's perception of them is so much higher. So it's like, oh, well, we don't have a face person. This person's calling us into, the Kingsguard is pulling us in to talk to the mayor or whatever of the town. And we're like, oh, this is probably going to go badly. We know that this will probably go badly. Is there any sort of buffs we can do real quick? Can we pull in an NPC who might be able to help us with this? Like, you're already scrambling for those creative solutions to be like, hey, is there some way we can just be better at this? We want to drop whatever the charisma one of enhanceability. It's not Eagle Splendor, right? Is it Fox's Cunning? I can't remember. Whichever one of the enhanceabilities does charisma, so that way you can we can at least give ourselves that much and see if that can get us ahead. Maybe we can pass through this mostly unscathed. Lightly scathed, as they say, instead of heavily scathed. So I find that having 3 players kind of avoids that latency and encourages that dynamic problem solving in a totally different way. And, as I kind of stated, it's like, if the group decides to forgo covering one of those core D&D expectations for a party, it's a boon for us as a DM, not as a limitation. When I see a party who puts themselves together and they're like, well, nobody chose to play the healer, and be like, well, it's going to be real easy to put the screws to you if I need to. I'm not going to all the time. The thing would be like, hey, if you guys are getting a little too big for your britches, you're getting a little overconfident about stuff, there's like, oh, remember that I can pull the string on the sweater and it'll start unraveling very, very quickly. I have a way to make things very difficult for you very, very easily. A thing that you are generally not very good at. I know that I can easily put the party in a bad situation by dropping them into a social situation without a face. I know that this one has been my experience, happens a lot with newer players. Hey, we all built characters and nobody took survival. Great. All I got to do is drop you guys into the wilderness somewhere and be like, well, you guys don't know where you are. You don't know how to find your way. You don't know. You might die out here from exposure or just from starvation or dehydration. You might not be able to find consistently good water or food. You don't know which way you're traveling, all that kind of stuff. It's very, very easily. And you would be surprised the amount of parties that you will run for where nobody thinks in a game in which exploration is one of the 3 main pillars, that maybe being able to survive in the wilderness might be a good thing. Or doing something like throwing a flood of low CR monsters at a group if they don't have a lot of AoE options in combat. If they don't have a caster who's like a wizard who's got a fireball or something that's got a nice area effect spray where they can take out a bunch of low level monsters with very minimal hit points, is that you can flood an entire party very, very easily and put them in a position. A classic one is like a pack of wolves. Even for a pretty decent level party, like having a number of wolves attack them if they can't spread out damage and area effect means that those wolves, only one of them has to hit to prone somebody, and then all of them get advantage. They'll all start hitting. Because remember that functionally, even though their 2 hits not great, when you're prone, they get a +5, roughly, mechanically, to hit you. So they're going to start hitting a lot more. And there's a whole lot of them, so it's sort of a death by big numbers kind of thing. Puts them in a situation where they can really overcome a powerful party just because they don't have somebody who's got area of effect options. And in that same way, like I said, I can lean into the strength of the party. That helps me as a DM control the pacing. I can ensure that the cadence of the game has consistent up and down beats, because I can easily dial in that tension whenever I need to. Compared to that balanced but kind of boring 4-player group where everybody's kind of okay. The group is kind of okay at everything. And those are for the most part my reasonings as to why I love 3-player parties. So I want to talk about some other sizes of player groups. And I figure we'll go from like small to large, and this will talks a little bit about my personal experience with playing and running for groups of these different sizes. The first is solo. Playing solo D&D is really cool. It's very special and works in very special ways. Is the best way to put that. First of all, there's no scheduling issues ever. Like, it's impossible to have scheduling issues. If I want to play and I'm available, I get to play D&D. It's really great for trying out PC builds, or if you want to explore world building ideas as a dungeon master in a very diegetic way. It's like you drop your own character into the world and ask questions about the world and try to go do things in the world and be like, okay, my character wants to, I don't know, wants to get in contact with some sort of like undercity, underground, illegal activity groups. Maybe they're looking for a fence in the city. Okay. Maybe I decided to play rogue and they're looking for a fence in the city to fence some stolen goods they have. Great. That means now I know they probably need a fence in this city somewhere. Who might that be? Then I start looking at locations. Well, maybe this person's here, maybe they're here. And then I can build an NPC for that. That's a very easy, diegetic way to do world building. A solo play is very fun. It's very immersive way to explore world building and build just general DM chops, your chops as a DM. This is definitely one of the things that's changed my advice for new dungeon masters. Because I think my advice in earlier, as it is for a lot of people consistently, is now dungeon masters is like, just run the game. Just run a one shot, do the game, it'll be fine. That's still not bad advice, but now I'm like, if you think that you are interested in maybe running D&D, maybe try solo D&D first. You don't have to do it for like a year or whatever. Like just play like a few sessions, and solo sessions tend to be pretty short, maybe like 1 or 2 hours, because you're doing all the work. So you get burned out and tired very easily, kind of doing that. It's a lot of mental exercise. But it's a really great way to start to understand what you need to provide for a game as a dungeon master when you have to dungeon master for yourself. I find it's especially good for building those improvisation skills for a DM. Those are the ones that people are always like, I heard that you need to work on improv as a DM, but like, how do I actually do that? And it's like, running a solo game for yourself, a game of D&D for yourself, or another TTRPG. There are others that are built specifically for solo play, which you might be a little bit easier to convert for a solo game, like an Ironsworn, which I have back on my shelf back there. Or just using like a GM emulator without any system attached to it, which you can still do and kind of play a game. It's a really great way to work on your improvisation skills because that entire game is pretty much improvisation. You're going to improv the entire game. You're not going to know anything. You take your character and you drop them into a world and be like, I don't know anything about this world. You have to build it out as you play it. So that tells you the things that, and highlights for you personally as a dungeon master, the things that maybe you need help, that muscle that you need to work on strengthening the most. I feel like these are the things where it's like, I feel like every time this comes up, and I have to wonder about like what's in this room. I'm like, I don't know what I need. Well, that's when you're like, well, maybe I need a roll table for just like items that are in a room, like dungeon dressing, like chamber dressing. It's like, oh, well, in this room there is an armoire, great, or like a side table of some sort, or a writing desk, or a big mirror, or a tapestry, and give you like a point of interest to kind of focus in on. And then what happens in that is like, oh, we're going to go investigate the tapestry. Great. The only thing I knew about it is that there was a tapestry. So now I need to improv what that tapestry is. And so it starts building that muscle as a dungeon master, which is very useful. So those are kind of the good things that I really enjoy about solo. Solo D&D solo play. So, some counterpoints. It's not the traditional D&D experience. And that can be unfulfilling, specifically as a player and a dungeon master. As it is just me, myself, and I playing. And it requires you to be both part DM and part player at the same time, which is very, very weird role where you're such a mix of both of them that it, like I said, it does not feel like traditional D&D necessarily. One of the other things that struggles with it, there's no one to bounce ideas off of. It's just yourself. That's why you have like the roll tables, the inspiration tables, to roll on that like help you spark something. Think about something when you're like, hey, why did this happen? I have no idea. Let me roll for it, I guess. And when you're like, I don't know which decision is better. Do I try plan A or plan B? There's nobody else to like bounce that idea off and be like, somebody's like, well, I think plan B is better. It's like, have you considered plan C? So you really, the buck stops with you. It can feel silly having like social RP scenes, or AKA talking to yourself. It can feel a little silly when you're playing a game and you might just be sitting there and like in your head talking to yourself, or maybe out loud if you talk to yourself that way. Which is not wrong, but it can feel silly and look silly, so depending on who you're doing it around. And the only best lends itself to character-driven stories rather than plot-driven stories. Because of the nature of solo D&D, or really any solo game, is that you can't really create a plot beforehand, which means that your games need to be character-driven. So if you're not familiar with the difference between plot-driven and character-driven story, which is very much a storytelling thing, it's what is the center of a story. So in a lot of stories, it's like most contemporary like fiction is plot-driven. It's not necessarily character-driven. So plot-driven would be like, hey, if you, what's a good example? I don't know if it's a good example, but something like the Hunger Games. If you took out the main character, you could take the main character from the Hunger Games and swap them out and pick any of the other contestants in the Hunger Game and slot them in, and the plot would still kind of work the same. That means that it's very plot driven. Whereas if you're like, if you wanted to take something like, I was going to say the Metamorphosis, even though Metamorphosis is very character driven, right? It's only about that character and their interaction. So if you swap out those characters, another character being placed in the Metamorphosis situation might react entirely different to what's happening in that plot. Because the plot is basically turned into a big bug. So that's not much of a plot. So it really is very character driven. So when you don't know what the plot's going to be for your game, you need it to be character driven, which means that you need to bring a character that's going to have some sort of strong goal and motivation to achieve that goal. Which generally all D&D characters should have some sort of goal, something they want to do in the world that gives them motivation to go on adventuring, something that they're going to get out of adventuring. So for a solo game, you really need that character driven. Like, they have to have some sort of agenda, because that's the only thing that for sure you're going to know about the world, is that you need to know what that character is going to be going after. They need to be motivated, self-motivated, rather than externally motivated. And because, like, if you try to do a plot-driven solo game, what you're going to end up with, I think, is it's going to feel like a very roundabout way to write a book. Because you're like, okay, I've set out the plot, and now I'm just filling in the gaps in between the plot, between the different, nodes of the plot. It's like, that's just writing a book with extra steps. And I very much enjoy solo TTRPG gaming, but I would be sad if it was my only way to interact with D&D or the greater hobby of TTRPGs. I enjoy the communal aspect of the game, and you are not going to get that in a solo game. It's just very different. Let's talk about duet games. So duet games are one-on-one games. One dungeon master, one player. These are by far the easiest game to schedule because it's only 2 people. Obviously, you don't have to schedule any games when you're just playing by yourself, but with 2 people, there's only one other person to work with, which makes it pretty easy to schedule games. You can get a weekly game going pretty easily. Especially if you're willing to play shorter sessions, which you probably will do. Because like I said, when you have the fewer players you have, the quicker they go through content. So if you take what you might prep for a 4-hour session and knock that down to about an 1.5 or 2-hour session, the same amount of prep, that's about how much table time you're probably going to get out of it, if even that much. For good or bad, the entire game hangs on one PC. So you get this microscopic, laser-focused, or incredibly personal D&D that's only about this character, in the same way that solo RPG is. But the DM style of play and the player style of really have to mesh to be successful for any sort of like long-term campaign. If you have somebody who's a player who's really wants a really big combat person, they just want to do a bunch of combat. It's kind of their focus of play. They love like power gaming and doing that. And you have a dungeon master who's like, actually, I'm more of a like social RP kind of player. That's kind of the games that I like. Those 2 people trying to play a game together are not going to have a lot of fun. And they only have one player and one DM to focus on. As the DM, you're going to be like, my player keeps trying to get in fights constantly. And the player's going to be like, my DM keeps wanting me to just talk to people. It's like, I don't care about these people. I just want to swing my sword and kill goblins. I want to kick down doors and kill orcs. Different style of play. So, I would say that duet games, like one-on-one D&D, is probably the fastest game of D&D you're ever likely to play. Even faster than solo D&D. Solo D&D, there's a lot of like, I need to check a table, or I need to think about that. When you have one person who's dedicated to being the DM, filling the DM role, and one person who's dedicated to being the player role, and not somebody who's trying to do 50% of each, it goes extremely fast. There's not a lot of random table rolling and all that kind of stuff, and the DM's going to be prepped for the session, which you can't really do for solo D&D. I find that this can be the hardest for many DMs, doing a solo, or doing a duet campaign. because the amount you need to prep for a single PC can be significantly higher than you need to prep for a standard game, which seems weird. So it's like the amount of prep you need to do sometimes is more. If you were trying to play a 3 or 4 hour session as a duet game, number one, that's really tiring. To be honest, as somebody who ran a duet campaign for a long time, really focusing in and only doing like 2 hour sessions will help you a lot. But you need to prep a lot more content. The thing is that it's really easy to prep that content. But you also need to be like ever present and quick to respond. To improvise a response, you don't really want a lot of downtime. You're not going to have a lot of times where the party is talking to each other, because there's only one player and they're going to be talking to you. So you need to be pretty quick on improvisation. So it is sometimes a more difficult game to run. Similarly, you're going to probably need to manage an NPC sidekick, or sometimes even the full-blown second PC, in addition to your normal dungeon master duties, just to help the player be successful. It's really hard as one player to be successful, and this is something that I didn't talk about in solo play, but is also very common in solo play. It's just D&D is not, like I said, there's the inherent design of D&D, which kind of always assumes a four-person party of your standard fighter, wizard, cleric, rogue loadout. So if you only have one of those things, that means that you're missing basically 75%. You're going to be weak in 75% of the areas of the game, which is not great. So you definitely need somebody else to give you sometimes just the help action. That's where having a familiar and a sidekick can be really helpful, because it can really help you be more successful at a lot of different aspects of the game that you otherwise would be constantly failing as a player. But if you're inexperienced with running a sidekick, you can easily trend into DMPC territory and get into trouble where you're like, the sidekick or NPC that you're running can accidentally, because you're prepping the game, but also planning for this NPC, you can actually end up pulling that focus away from the player's character to your own DMPC, taking the main focus. This is when you hear those horror stories about people who have a DMPC who's like the center, always center stage. And I've run into that a few times as a player, generally not as a DM. I try not to run DMPCs for the most part. Like I said, in duet games, that's really difficult to do. Like, you're gonna have to run somebody. You're gonna have somebody to help them out. And you don't necessarily want to give them both. I mean, you could give them the stat block if you wanted to for the NPC sidekick. That's actually not a terrible idea. Depends on the experience level of your player, whether they're like, I can handle running a PC and a sidekick as well, or even 2 sidekicks. Like, that'll be easy. I can do that. Whereas you might have inexperienced players who are like, running one PC is already takes up all my cognitive load. Like, there's no extra I can add to that. But yeah, that's for duets. Duos, pretty straightforward. Very easy to schedule sessions. There's only 3 people you need to schedule with. It continues to be very intimate. It's highly narrative. Again, they play exceedingly fast. There's a lot of intense spotlight on player characters, because each one gets basically 50% of the spotlight. When it comes to 3 players, running 2 PCs is tough to run, because they still have a lot of gaps. They have that same problem that like duet does, where it's like duet play often is kind of also a duo play. It's also playing with duos, because you're almost always going to have to give them some sort of sidekick. So they're very similar. You really need a strong theme for your campaign based off of what the PCs can do. I find if you really want duos to be successful, be like, okay, you guys have built a oh no, let me use a real example. So for a while I played a GM-less game with one other friend, and where we played a ranger and a paladin. So I was like, okay, I need to make a campaign, the basis of a campaign and or adventure that makes sense for these 2 characters to be together. They're like, okay, and this is not something I did solo, this is something I did with the other player too. I was like, all right, I'm playing a paladin, you're playing a ranger. We're both playing elves. That's great. What if we're both elves that are envoys from a distant land trying to set up trade compacts? Because I knew my paladin's background was going to be like the merchant. So I was like, okay, I've got a little bit of charisma, I've got this merchant thing, I'm an official Oath of the Crown paladin, so I'm like an official representative of the government coming here to try to like of a trading house, a mercantile business here to sort of like set up trade compacts. And of course I have the ranger with me who's there to help me get there and back safely and identify, routes that we can actually, the trade caravans or ships can actually come back and forth across. So I was like, oh yep, makes total sense why these two characters are together. They have a very strong goal as to why they're doing it. They have very strong motivation. They're both basically crown agents for a dragon empire. Makes total sense why they're doing this. And we have a situation where, we're playing a ranger and a paladin, which means we both have a little bit of healing. We're both pretty tough in a fight. So we've got the tank part kind of covered. We've got the healing part kind of half covered. We've got somebody who's got some pretty decent outdoor skills with the ranger, and we've got somebody who's got a little bit of talking skills with the paladin. So we've got most of our bases pretty well covered. But we're exceptionally bad at magic focused tasks. We don't have any arcane magic. So that was definitely one of the weaknesses for the characters. So it was like, hey, if I ever needed to make things more difficult for them, I could always throw like some sort of specifically magical issue at them, and they'll be like, this is going to be a thing we're just not very good at. This is a thing we're going to need to go find a hireling and go talk to a wizard or something like that. And there was a nearby mage tower that we ended up rolling up in the world and be like, okay, now we have a source of somebody we can take like arcane stuff to. So if we go to an adventure side and be like, oh, we can't decipher these arcane runes or whatever, what this spell does, and make a rubbing of the arcane sigils, schlep it all the way back to the mage tower and ask this mage to take a look at it. Sure, do we need to pay them? Probably. Knowing me, I'm like, well, they're not going to accept gold. They only accept favors. It's like, okay, so if you want them to do this thing, you're going to have to do something for them, or they're going to hold a favor in reserve for later to send you on some little side quest. And that's how the game runs, and the game just starts running by itself under its own inertia. Other problems with two-player games, or two-player groups. Technically a three-player game. One person's DMing. If one player misses a couple of sessions, the game is likely to collapse. Really hard to play sessions if one person is missing, because it's really difficult to balance or rebalance sessions for one PC on the fly by basically losing 50% of your PCs. And it's very difficult for a player to try to run two full PCs by themselves and be responsible for all the decision making of the session. And you also have the inherent problem of any even-numbered group, is that there's always a chance that you're going to get a hung vote where they're not going to agree on which way to go. And like we said, it's really bad if you have two solo characters that you're trying to DM for. Both because that puts them in a lot of danger, and also they still have the same problem where they can't bounce ideas off of other people. It's just slow. And when they split up, that means that 50% of the group will miss the action all the time. So one person's going to miss 50% of the game, and the other person's going to miss 50% of the game. That's how it's going to go. Pizza. Come here. I got a piece of hair on the microphone. Get out of here. Whereas with 3 sessions can still move forward because there's like a majority of players there. And the players are always going to be present. With a small group, it's easier for one of the players or the DM to, Jaeger missing the missing PC to help with, even if it's just simple stuff, you can have them give help actions, or, if the healer, they can give their heals, or they can step in that background to take care of like mundane to-dos. They're carrying the light source, they're packing up the treasure and looting the bodies, etc., etc. So everybody else can kind of focus on the more important aspects of doing the adventure. You have 7 players in your current game. That's a lot of players. 2 players have never played before and likely won't play again because of the party being far too large for the DM. Yeah, it's a problem. That's exactly Meatball. That's exactly what we're talking about. that for me, that ideal number is 3 players. 3 players, 1 DM. And having played a lot similar to that situation you've had, I've run for 7 to 8 players, and it's generally not fun as a dungeon master either. It's just so much, you have so much going on. And by that nature, the game has to be really, really simplistic to keep all those plates spinning. So I like actually having a much, much smaller table. And especially once you start getting to, when you have 7 players, you can split that up into 2 groups of 4 pretty easily. You just need one person to kind of step up and be like, I'm willing to at least try to run something. Doesn't have to be perfect. They just have to try. Shore Coast Pirate campaign I'm starting this year will have to... Yeah, much more manageable. Again, I'm biased, so I say go for 3 players. But, you got to do you. Obviously, if you have one extra person who wants to play, it's hard to say no to that person. But generally, like I said earlier, it's like you really want to try to get a situation where at least one, if not all of the other people in that group are willing to at least run the occasional one-shot or little adventure, so that way you can avoid some of that DM burnout kind of aspect as well. And helps you train somebody else to do some dungeon mastering. That way you can reach that Shangri-La of having a table of nothing but dungeon masters. So that way you never have to worry about being the forever DM. Let's talk about... There's not much to say about 4 PCs. 4 PCs is pretty straightforward. It's the inherent number of the D&D is designed for, and it is the going expectation. Let's talk about running for, as we're talking about Meatball, that 5 PCs or more. So when one of the things that when I see the proponents say about it is that, oh, there's so much role diversity and tactical depth and complexity. And I'm like, that's never been my play experience on either side of the screen in large groups like that, or even watching actual play shows like a Dimension 20 or Critical Role. I played and run for big groups, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Each additional player, as we said, increases the negatives of that logarithmically. So you're talking about complexity, saying that the game is more complex. Adding more people is not the type of complexity I want from my TTRPG systems. If I wanted to play a complex game, I would be playing more Pathfinder, where the system is the complexity that I'm looking for. Not the complexity that is adding more people. Adding more ingredients to the stew does not make the stew inherently better. But having a stew that's balanced around having a certain number of flavors in it, that's different. Primarily, it's just because large groups are slow. They take forever to make decisions because everybody has to get on the same page. They bloat that standard combat encounter length, as we talked about. There's more hit points at the table. There's more creatures. There's more turns and more effects to manage. All of those. As we said, it's like if you add one more player character into a combat, you're going to be adding, most of the time, at least one more monster into that. So that's instead of adding one more turn in combat, you're now adding at least 2 more turns in combat. An entire new glut of hit points and an entire new glut of hit points that you have to get through on one side or the other. There's more effects that they're going to be doing, more concentration spells, just more. It's just more. And more is not one of the things that's set up here. They said they wanted tactical depth and complexity. Again, if you're looking for tactical depth, I'm not sure 5e 2024 D&D is what you're going for. If you were looking for complexity and tactical depth, I've got a great secret for you. There's this thing called Pathfinder. You should check it out. You're going to love it. If that's what you're looking for. Adding more people into that is not going to do that. As far as role diversity, that's just kind of not true. Like we said, D&D's core assumption is that you're going to have, is the classic sort of like MMO assumption, is that you're going to have a tank. You're going to have somebody who's going to deal damage or do skills and stuff like that. You're going to have somebody who's going to do healing of some type. And you're going to have somebody who's going to do, magic, control effect, area effect stuff. That is the assumption. That has been the assumption for many a decade now. And so adding more players in, there are not classes that don't hit those roles in some way. It does something particularly different. Now, you could do something, like if you want to talk about role diversity, somebody who's like, oh, well, I took a non-combat character who's really not focused on being combat oriented. That's great. I hate to tell you this, about 50% of table time, regardless of how many combats you run, ends up being combat. Just because combats take longer than any other scene in general, on average, to resolve. So, anytime that you're like, I'm going to build a non-combat oriented character, I hope you're prepared to be really bored with your game about 50% of the time in most sessions. Which is unfortunate. Unless you're really playing in a group who doesn't like combat, and they really avoid having combat. If you're doing that, then you already know that there are already going to be other players like that, so that's not even going to be a particularly unique character that you're going to be building. Another thing that happens with larger groups, that reduced spotlight for everything, that shift in players from mostly engaged. You'll see that shift from players being mostly engaged to mostly unengaged in the game. They're going to be, anytime that you're running the game, you can look up and be like, hey, do I see people who are distracted on their devices waiting for their turn? Do I see people who are having crosstalk conversations that are not paying attention? Do I see people who are not taking notes? This one I put under like the bystander effect, is that as the group gets larger, the assumption grows that somebody else in the group is taking notes and that you don't need to take notes. That is just the thing that happens. I don't know why that is. If you have a smaller groups, I can tell you, in the current campaign that I play right now, and maybe it's not the greatest example because we have a very, very good group. I play in a game that only has 3 players in it and 1 DM. All 3 players, we all take notes. All the time. One person's notes are way better than everybody else's notes. Guess what? That person's not me, by the way. I still take notes. I still take notes that are important not only to my character, but kind of the general plot. But are a little bit more focused on me, on my character specifically. Just because I assume that the other players are not taking notes about the specifics of my character and what's going on with them. But yeah, that is definitely something that I see in larger groups, is that the larger the group gets, the less likely it is that people are taking notes in it. Just to finish speaking to the design assumptions for the roles and being like, there's the role diversity. I mean, like, once you get beyond the classic stuff about the fighter, the cleric, the wizard, and the rogue, most of the other classes just kind of become like muddy hedge duplicates of classes. Like, if we want to think about a ranger is just kind of a fighter mixed with a druid. Basically, all charisma casters are faces, and they're all built with the ability to pick up social skills. They're built that way. A paladin is just kind of a cleric and a fighter smooshed together. A druid is just kind of a cleric, but re-themed for wilderness. The druid now has some other stuff that's very unique to them. But if you take away wild shape, they're not that much different. And think about the artificer as basically, in a lot of ways, a gadget-based wizard. Actually, I'd say it would be like more of a... I think the artificer is maybe a little bit closer to a wizard, or a gadget-based sorcerer that's being skinned as a wizard. It's generally how I think about an artificer, because it's definitely more like I would say more like a sorcerer than it is like a wizard, but it is very int focused in that aspect. And when you're talking about like diversity of like different roles and different groups and different characters, it's like when you have 4 basic roles that a party needs to do, you have 3 different pillars of gameplay, 3 ever important saves, which is of course Dex, Con, Wiz, and 17 to 18 skills divided between 4 ability scores. There is kind of a metric buttload of overlap between PCs. And the more PCs you put on that stack, the more overlap you're going to have, which means there's less individuality between all those characters. So that's one of the things where it's like when the proponents talk about like the diversity of like characters you're playing, it's like they're not mechanically, at least. Then you have to have a conversation and be like, your character's probably not as special and interesting as you think it might be. Which kind of gives a little bit of a main character syndrome, but that's neither here or there. Let's say tactical depth and complexity. We already talked about that. So rather than sort of the complexity of the game, which we've already covered, it's this amazing tactical depth, which I don't think 5e or 2024 particularly has. I think there are other systems, there are other editions of D&D that do that significantly better than 5th edition. 5th edition is kind of like right in the middle when it comes to complexity. There's certainly 3rd edition and 4th edition are much more complex tactically games than 5e is. Yeah, and it becomes not who can do the thing, but who does it best, which is not as engaging. Yeah. It's really... I've had this problem come up multiple times, even as a player, where I'm like, oh, I'm the rogue, and I have thieves' tools. Oh, the artificer also has thieves' tools. Oh, this other character also, the bard also has thieves' tools. It's like, yeah, technically I'm better probably at picking locks, but the likelihood is that there's a 2 out of 3 chance that either one of them is going to get to the locked door before I do, because I'm going to be busy, looting bodies or doing something else. And the likelihood is the DC is not going to be high enough that they won't get it, especially if they're giving each other the help action or something like that. So, I mean, being great in a sea of good is not as impressive as being the only person who can do the thing. Talk about sort of the pragmatism of 3-player groups. Smaller party means the DM can tailor scenes tightly. There's less unnecessary filler that you need to put in, as we talked about, stuff to cut out. You can really laser focus specifically on the theme that you're trying to go for the game. The play is much faster, especially combats. They're often more thrillingly deadly too, just because we said you can't fill all the roles very competently. So things are going to slip through the cracks, and when they slip through the cracks, they're going to take your HP away, which means that it's going to be much more deadly. And the party making decisions with fewer participants and voices at the table without ever being 50-50 split on decisions because you have an odd number of players. Very, very nice stuff. It's just, pragmatically, it just plays better. It's very easy when you only have 3 players to build an entire campaign focused off of only the 3 PCs the players are bringing to the table, because you can focus very much in on their commonalities. Talking about, okay, what are the things that the commonalities, just like I talked about with that Paladin and Ranger example from the game that I played in. You're like, oh, why would these 2 characters be together? Okay, well, here's a very clear reason why these characters would be together. And that was just because we both happened to build elves. We didn't really coordinate that. We're just like, okay, I built this kind of character and I built this kind of character. Okay, well, they might be together for this reason. And that's much easier to do with 3 PCs as it does with 4+. It's very much like, if you've ever seen a communications graph, you'll notice that 3 people is sort of the ideal triangle of communication, because each person only needs to coordinate with 2 other people. So there's 3 lines of communication between 3 different people, which is ideal. That's 1 line of communication per person. The moment you go to 4 lines of communication, each person now has 3 different lines of communication. So you significantly start to exponentially become more complex, and more things have to be agreed upon. More things have to be set in stone correctly for everything to work all together. The fewer different points you can have, the easier it's going to be to maintain and get those things to be all cohesive together very, very easily. Often, and this is a very easy thing to do, you can ask the players to determine 1 through line in their PCs at the start. Hey, we're all going to play elves. Oh, this is going to be maybe a marine campaign, so everybody's going to have water vehicle proficiency. Even when you get down to like 3 players, it's very easy to play very, very thematic campaigns. You'd be like, we're all going to play fighters. And there's diverse enough fighting styles and archetypes that we can ensure that all the PCs will feel different at the table, even though we're all going to play fighters. You can play like the Banneret, which is kind of a healer or warlord-y kind of character. You can play the Battle Master, who's got all the cool maneuvers, who can get people to do different things in combat. And you've got the arcane archer who can add a little bit of arcane to that, and also now you have a fighter who's a ranged person. And that also means that there's probably going to be somebody in the party who's focused on strength. There's going to be somebody in the party who's focused on dex, and Banneret might be focused. They're certainly going to have probably higher charisma than any of the other two, so they should be okay at doing talky kind of stuff, even for fighters. And from an RP perspective, you have more time to devote to each character's backstory and goals with this month. Yes, absolutely, Meeple. Absolutely. You can really zoom in, like all that stuff's going to be super hyper focused, which is what we want out of our campaign. It's really frustrating to play, especially in a larger campaign, and feel like you're kind of sitting on the roller coaster going down the track and being like, well, I'm in the seat, but this doesn't really feel like it's about me. Very little of this game feels like it's about my character. My character's just kind of along for the ride. Let's see. It's easier to keep those narrative hooks personal. We just talked about that. When you have 3 players, like every item, spell, and tactical choice has a much heightened significance in the game. You're always going to have holes in the party. So resource management becomes a very, not only just like a style of D&D play, which is kind of an older style, where it's like, oh, resource management is the thing that older games kind of focus on. It's like, hey, no, this is like plot integral. Like, hey, this is a survivability thing now. It's like, oh, well, we don't care about having rations. It's like, well, you chose to not have somebody in the party who has survival, and maybe nobody took the Outlander background, or if you're playing old 5e. In 2024, you don't have to worry about that as much. Like, so you guys, if you're in the wilderness, like, we're absolutely going to be keeping track of rations, because there's a chance you could just die out here. You could be super powerful, you know, level 3 PCs, but if, you know, you don't have a cleric who's taking, you know, create food and water, and you don't have anybody who's got survival in the party because you all decided to make a whole bunch of really combat-oriented characters and make those choices, then just kind of fumbling around in the woods is a great way for you guys to just die. And that should be a weak point to your characters. That should come up occasionally in the campaign. It shouldn't only be the stuff you're good at. Occasionally, the party should have to deal with stuff they're not kind of good at. And so that resource management becomes important to the gameplay. You give a lot more options to include occasional hirelings and ally NPCs who can tag along with the group and help without being forgotten or stealing the show. Like that happens in that duet game or a duo game where you're like, they need an extra NPC in there to kind of help, and then you actually accidentally end up doing that DNPC where you pull focus away from the players. Not going to happen in a 3-player game. I mean, you can still, if you're being a bad DM, you can still be a bad DM regardless of how many players are at the table. You can still do that. It's still easy to do. But you kind of have to go out of your way to do it. And the easiest way to do that is make an NPC who's helping them out with a specific skill. This would be like if they decided to make that party and nobody took survival, nobody took anything like that, they should be hiring guards. That's something you look from the Tomb of Annihilation when you get to Port Yonzaru, is that like, hey, you need to hire a guide to like get you through the jungle because you don't know what you're doing or where you're going. And so hiring that NPC, and then cool thing is that will actually change when we talked about that resource management thing. That guide then becomes a resource. You can have an entirely different style of combat when you're like, oh, we're deep in the jungle exploring this thing. We're following this guide who's basically our lifeline to getting through here. If the combat becomes, instead of being like, oh, we just need to kill all the goblins, it's like, no, you need to specifically ensure that the goblins don't kill your guide, or else you guys are stuck in the middle of a trackless jungle and you will probably die in here. Totally different setup for combat, totally different goal and motivation for the combat now. It's like, oh, the goblins are probably not going to kill your PCs. Like, you're pretty beefy. There's not that many of them. But they can sure as heck kill that guy. Because that guy is commoner, and he's got 8 hit points. Actually, I think they give them 4 hit points, right? They only give them half their hit die. It's like, 1 arrow can take that guy out. So you really need to make sure that he stays alive. That's really important. It's a totally different style of combat when you're like, oh, this is now becomes like, oh, we've got to protect this guy who's going to get us through the jungle. Very different style of game. Which is a very easy way anytime you're in any sort of mode of transportation. It's very classic. It's like, oh, we're going to jump on the ship, and then the ship's going to get attacked by Sahagin or whatever. And usually that's just like a fight on the deck, which is not that different than usually having a fight on land. You might do like some pitching deck rolling kind of stuff where it's like, oh, you got to roll deck saves or you fall down on the deck or whatever. And that's fun. But also being like, oh, none of you guys have like water vehicle navigation. So if these guys kill the sailors on the ship, you won't have enough people who know what they're doing to sail the ship. And then you're just on a piece of wood stuck in the middle of the ocean. That's a much larger problem than Sahagin. So you change the stakes. So yeah, combat and roleplay become these like high velocity vehicles because things get much snappier. Because you're reducing not only the number of players that need turns in combat, but also the requisite number of monsters that are on the other side facing them. So you're removing one PC, but you're also going to be removing probably one monster or more, depending on what your balancing is for an encounter. From an encounter, or reducing hit points of like a boss or something like that, which is something you should be doing. If you're running a solo monster and you only have 3 PCs, you should consider shaving off some of their hit points just to make the combat go a little bit faster, because they're not going to be dealing as much damage. And you might want to even tweak down the damage just a little bit, because again, all monsters are kind of tuned assuming that they're going to be fighting 4 PCs and not 3 PCs. So you might want to drop it down. You don't necessarily need to drop it down like 25%. But like if somebody did 2d6 plus 3, you might decide to go, oh, maybe I make that a little bit flatter. Maybe I make that 1d12 plus 1. So it's like there's occasional big swings, but it's more likely that they're going to do low damage as well. So we're going to make the damage a little inconsistent. Or swap it down, like the easiest thing to do is drop it down to 2d4. Which, in the grand scheme of things, does not change it very much. It changes from the average of 2 dice being 7 to 5, so it's kind of taking it down by just 2 points. But per damage is not bad for every time they hit with that attack. Let's talk about some practical tips. Actually, at this point, I'm going to take a little bio break, and then we'll come back and knock this out. I'm going to do a bio break and refill up on my coffee, and we'll go from there. So you guys hold on. I'm going to do that. We'll be back in just a minute. All right, so how did I get to running games where there were 7, 8 players? Well, back when the world was dark, I for a stint ran basically a game at a comic shop / game store. That I was kind of like their official dungeon master, and so I was promoted by the store and came in and ran that stuff for people. And that is when you could see the DM shortage. It was like there were people who wanted to play D&D who were interested. A lot of first timers too. A lot of people who didn't really know what they were doing yet, who were just interested in D&D and saw there was an opportunity that they could go to like their local shop and somebody would run something for them. So I did that for a long time, and because very much that DM shortage, like there wasn't anybody else around, just me. I would often balloon up to tables like 7 or 8 players. Would try not to do that. Even if you, after doing it once, being like, ooh, this is a problem. This is very, very difficult to do compared to a standard game table. But yeah, that's sort of how I got to it. And now I know, it's like, even as a player, when sometimes I'll get invitations for a group, or if I'm looking, in one of the time periods of my life in which I'm looking for a group. Luckily, I have 2 good groups right now that I'm playing in. Looking for a group and be like, oh, well, we already have 4 people, but we could add like a 5th seat if you want it, and be like, oh, no, probably I'm okay. I mean, I might try it out, and if I was the 5th seat, I'd be okay. If I was going to be the 6th seat, my answer would probably be no. And like they say, like the adage goes, no D&D is better than bad D&D. And if there is a struggling dungeon master who is got 6 players at their table, and then they get a sniff, they get a whiff, a scent on the wind that I am also a dungeon master, they will try to rope me into running for the 6 people, and I'm like, I don't want to do that. Not because I don't like running, it's like that's too many people. I don't find it fun, so I won't be doing that. Let's keep moving on. We were going to talk about some practical tips for running 3-player games. So, encounter design, that's one of the things where, as far as math-wise is concerned for D&D, the biggest things that are going to necessarily be changed, that are like fundamental changes that you need to do. You need to keep those encounters snappy by hovering around that 2-1-2 ratio of PCs to monsters. If you don't know what that is, it's basically you want in generally, for the way that 5e and 2024 math works, if you want to keep encounters optimized, I guess, the part where they function the best, like as they're written out of the box, is you want to keep the ratio between monsters that are about just above half as many players, but not twice as many as there are players. So let's say if you, in this instance, because we're talking about a 3-player group, so down you would be like, they could probably have they could fight up to 5 monsters. 6 is pretty dicey, like you can do it, but really when you focus in between 5 and 2, between 2 to 5 monsters is going to give you the sweet spot where you want to be, where you can have just a little bit more than the players and then just a little bit less than the players, and rather than playing 1 versus 3 or 7 versus 3, something like that, where the math of D&D's encounter, which is already not super great math, begins to break down very, very quickly if you get outside that range. So I keep it within those ratios most of the times. Even if you're going to do like a big solo encounter, you need to be adding some like mobs or some small adds into the encounter. They can be borrow some of the old minion rules and run stuff like that. Just you want some more stuff on the board to keep the encounters interesting. Speaking of solo monsters, you do want to utilize higher CR monsters for solo encounters, which are already naturally out of the box going to work better against fewer PCs, because we do know that action economy is one of the big things that changes encounters, and solo encounters really, really suffer that. Solo monsters really suffer from that action economy imbalance. But if you have one less PC than is kind of assumed, that's going to help a lot. But you also want to make sure that you spread out that multi-attack damage. There's a lot of those creatures, like you're thinking about, like dragons are like claw, tail. So you want to make sure that you want to spread out that multi-attack damage as much as possible. You want to try to keep your your monsters in between all of them. You don't really want to turn on one character and then go claw tail, and then that person goes from 100% hit points to like 0 hit points in a turn, which can happen, especially in the lower levels, very, very easily. You want to try to spread out that multi-attack damage. One of the things that sometimes we forget as Dungeon Masters that you need to remember is that you can always split move and fire, which is a wargaming, like tabletop wargaming term, but the idea is that you can move in between portions of your action. And wargaming is usually like you have to move and then take an action, or take an action and then move, but you can't do move, take an action, and continue moving. That's split moving and firing. That is something you can do in D&D 5e right out the box. So if you have this creature that can make 3 attacks, you'd be like, oh, it makes an attack, it provokes an opportunity attack, or uses its bonus action, disengage, or whatever, and then continues to finish its attacks on the other creatures, the other PCs that are on the board. And if you're worried about them having, taking too many opportunity attacks right off of what's on the board, it's okay to just be like, well, you know what, I'm gonna give them a little extra buffer of hit points, just because I think it's more important that the monster spreads out its attacks than necessarily that it's going out of its way to kind of make itself easier to kill. That's not necessarily what we're trying to do. Other things that work: utilize more chases and flights in your games. That's just kind of a general rule that I have. There is to do more of those. But running from a horde of monsters or having to fight them or fighting them, combat becomes the losing state for that. Like, oh, you guys didn't get away from the horde of monsters that are chasing your 3 characters down, so you have to turn around and make a stand. Or that you're chasing down a single monster that's running from the PCs, and like the win state is that you corner it so that way you can fight it and probably get information out of it is probably what you're doing. It's something like that, as opposed to just killing it, though you might just be killing it. Some of these are just consistent. It's very natural. Sometimes D&D, especially for newer D&Ds, it's like, okay, there's like all the other parts of the game, and then the game drastically switches into combat mode. It's like being able to do like chases and flights are ways to like transition between that. Let me like, oh, you guys are investigating this haunted house. I'm thinking about Ghost of Saltmarsh. It's like, oh, that mansion up on the hill is haunted. And it's like, nope, it's got bandits in it. Totally different. But you go in there and you find bandits, and the bandits, you find the lead bandit leader, and they're like, you come across their smuggler's cove or whatever, you catch them in the act. If they're outnumbered, then there's a good chance they might just try to run. So if they run, the players can just try to track down whoever they think is in charge and try to go after them. Rather than just being like, oh, you show up into the room, there are people in here, immediately combat happens. Be like, nope, you're assuming that they're going to fight you. They might not want to fight you. But at the same time, like, you might walk into the warehouse and it's not like there are 3 bandits in here. There's like 20 bandits in here. And you're like, oh, this would be a bad fight. You guys don't want to be in here. And that's something you can communicate as a Dungeon Master very clearly. You don't need to be clever about it. You just need to be clear about it. You're like, oh, this would be a bad combat if you decide to fight all these guys. Your player characters are smart enough in universe to know this is bad and that you should probably run. Now you're running and they're chasing you, which then allows you to do like a wave combat where instead of fighting 20 all at once, you can fight like groups of like 3 or 4 of them at a time. And the longer you fight and not run away, the more they show up. And they might not all chase after you. Maybe only some of them do. But it helps you kind of manage that on the fly. Alright, when you're about to hit the combat slog, which is the 4th round of combat, look for ways to quickly end the combat. Converting it to a hostage situation, ordering a retreat. The bad guys order a retreat. They try to negotiate instead. They flee, or they raise the alarm for reinforcements. Try to get out of the combat as quickly as you can once you get to the 4th round. That's just a good basic D&D rule. Is like, combat really works really well for about 3 rounds. Once you get to the 4th round, things start to slow down. That slog kind of happens. Usually, you'll hit a point in the combat where the momentum shifts in the combat, and it becomes clear who's going to win the combat. And that's usually about round 3 or 4. Where the player character is like, okay, we got everybody on the ropes. We're definitely going to win. As long as it's still unclear who's going to be winning this combat, then keep going with the combat. As soon as it becomes clear who's going to win the combat, that's when players stop using like spell slots. They're like, oh, I'm just gonna use cantrips from now, even though I've got spell slots remaining, because we've got these guys on the ropes. We've won this combat already. We're just grinding out those last hit points. Like what you do is you just figure out a way to stop the combat. So a hostage situation is like just grabbing one of the PCs or an NPC, grappling them and being like, this guy puts a blade to this guy's throat and is like, hey, throw down your weapons or I'm going to kill this guy. And you want to reinforce to be like, hey, this is what's going to happen. You guys need to decide really quickly if you're going to keep attacking this guy. I'm going to tell you, when it's his turn, this guy is going to stab the hostage if you keep attacking them. And this is not going to be, they're not going to do hit point damage. They're going to be like immediately reduced to 0 going into death saves. Like that's what's going to happen because this person has a knife to their throat. Like that, it's a totally different. This is not a combat thing. They can decide to retreat. They're going to pull back in an ordered manner. They might flee. They just run for it. They're like, we're being overwhelmed. They might decide to negotiate. That's something that comes up in Mine of Phandelver, is that if you run to the goblins first, and the goblin boss is like, hey, help us deal with the bugbear. They decide to negotiate in the middle of the fight. Or they call for reinforcements. This is all assuming, of course, humanoid enemies who are organized and thoughtful. But a lot of this kind of goes the same for thoughtless monsters as well. Like more bestial kinds of monsters. Hostage situation, like they're gonna grab and pin one of the people, and like, I'm thinking like bear style. They're gonna put a paw down on one of them and just like growl at the others, and it's like you can tell that this thing's trying to intimidate you, and that bad things are gonna happen if you keep attacking it. They can always retreat, right? They can always run away. Negotiating's probably not gonna happen. Generally, monsters should just run away at that point. They're either gonna try to intimidate you or run away. Or they're gonna call for backup. They will also do that. If they'll let out cries and it's like a pack or a herd or something, then they will come to their aid. Also ID the PC's strengths and the party's gaps, understand their combat roles, their ability scores, their skills, and use those as a consideration for your prep. It's an easy way to bring the limelight to a very specific character by including a strength challenge, using undead for the cleric to turn, using history to communicate a critical piece of information that the party otherwise wouldn't get just by using arcana or history in that case. Make it easier to make things more difficult to them. So again, I talked about this a lot already. Like the driver's dead, no one has land vehicle proficiency to drive the wagon. That becomes an issue. A big nasty solo monster is tough when they have no tank to soak up those multi-attack damages. So everyone dumps strength so climbing up the cliff is a dicey proposition without some sort of like clever spellcraft, making sure that everybody has like Featherfall available to them, or using a good use of the jump spells for stuff like that oftentimes doesn't get used. Parlay! Yes, exactly there. Yeah, parlay. Unfortunately, unless you've got speak with animals or really, really good animal handling, parlay is probably not going to be on the table for a lot of creatures that don't have a spoken language. But I mean, I don't know, shenanigans. You can figure it out, maybe. I'm not sure how to do it from a DM perspective. I'd have to think about it for a bit. Another one is to try to keep each adventure tied to one and only one PC's kind of deal. Their personal goal, or their background, or their class archetype, etc. Trying to engage one of those with any sort of adventure you're running is really helpful. I think that's actually a Chris Perkins tip from many years ago, where he talks about one of his tips for DMing. It's like some sort of con where he's doing a panel or a presentation, and that's one of the ones that he put forth. Is like, try to include one PC's deal into whatever adventure you're running, and only one of them. Don't try to mix them all in there together. Just choose one and focus on one, which will help keep things tight. And then obviously you just kind of rotate through characters. Encourage your players to build their PCs cooperatively. That's a very big one, just in general, like standard Session 0 stuff. Whether that's in a formal Session 0 or if they're doing it on their own. This will keep what we talked about from happening, where like every PC is being good or bad at the same thing, like everybody having thieves tools proficiency or nobody having thieves tools proficiency, and being like, okay, well now locked doors are like a real problem for you, and depending on what type of adventure you're running, locked doors happen a lot. Locked treasure chests happen a lot. Traps happen a lot. So not having somebody who can disarm those things is very difficult. Makes life very hard on you. Similarly, if every PC has a sneaky dex build, they're going to treat every obstacle as a nail, and their hammer will be their dexterity. So when you start mixing up the challenges, they're going to feel like punching bags. If like they're only going to being like sneaky, dexy kind of characters, if you start throwing anything else at them, because they're all super hyper focused on dex, any other challenge they're not going to be super great at. And also remember that like you can't really hide from creatures with blind sight or tremor sense as easily, because they can just see you unless you have actual like cover in some way that's actually blocking line of sight. You should have your players coordinate, cover that missing role in their party. I put down the example here. Like say for instance you want to play in a party where nobody really wants to play like a fighter. You can be like, oh well, we need like off tanks, so we're like, maybe I take one of us is going to be an armor artificer who has a pretty good AC. One of us is going to be a twilight cleric, which will give us access to heavy armor. One of us will be like a college of swords bard that gives them ability, and now you have three very fighty style characters, which makes sense that they're out adventuring together because they're all pretty tough fighters in their own right. But none of them is a fighter, but all of them have a lot more survivability in combat, because they're going to have a little bit better AC probably than they would otherwise have, and things being able to do parries and things like that help. If the party continues to struggle with a specific part of adventuring, let's say a survival, that's one of my favorite go-tos, allow them to pay for a guide. Let them hire somebody who will help them. It's a good way to get money out of your game, because that's a problem we often have with D&D, is that you pour a lot of money into PCs, and then the PCs don't really have anything to spend that money on. First big tip is to stop giving out as much money, is to very much not follow the example of the DMG and give out so much money. And the second one is you gotta make them spend it on stuff like mundane stuff, like cost of living stuff. You guys got to eat food, you got to sleep at places, and that should cost quite a bit of coin. And you should hire people like guides, or get horses and get a cart and have hirelings to carry your stuff around, who can help you with stuff, who can take care of your gear, etc., etc. And then, like I said, with the situation and being stuck in the jungle because your guide got killed, you can also threaten those non-combat PCs to mix up the occasional combat with a new goal. Because it would be a bad situation if your survival expert died while you were in the middle of a trackless jungle. When you have a smaller party, put a heavier focus on intra-party RP, like the player characters in character talking to each other. It's a great way to slow down the game, which was already going to go faster because you have one less person there, so they'll get through content faster than that sort of 45-minute per scene. They'll do it a little bit faster, not a ton faster. You're talking about some closer to like 30 to 45 minutes per scene. They'll be in there probably closer to about 40 minutes per scene, 35 to 40 minutes, depending on what kind of scene it is and what kind of characters you have and what kind of players you have. But if you have them engage in that intra-party RP, like, hey, what do you guys talk to each other about while you're walking? That's a good way to be like, hey, just kind of prompt them to do role play. It's a great way to lengthen out the game if your prep gets thin. Be like, hey, what are you guys are talking about? Or you remember that X, Y, and Z is something you haven't discussed with the party that you learned about. How do you communicate that to the party, etc.? And anytime that you can get the players talking to themselves, where you can an opportunity to kind of like sit back as a dungeon master and just kind of listen and take notes, you are in a good spot. That means you're doing something right. It will make the narrative of your game so much tighter and more engrossing if your players spend more time in character talking about the goings on of the game as their characters. Like it makes an extreme amount of difference as to the engagement of your players if if you put them in a position where they talk about the game in character as opposed to out of character more often. And depending on your players, consider shortening your sessions. Like I said, you're going to go through more content. It'll be a little bit more difficult to prep, or not difficult to prep, but you might have to prep more if you're running the same session length for a fewer number of players, because they'll get through stuff faster. Because fewer players make for faster play and more individual focus, which requires a level of prolonged attention from your players too, because players can also get burned out. It's in the same way that like playing online often is more tiring than it is playing in person. And that's like the Zoom fatigue aspect of it, kind of. Is staring at a screen as opposed to actually looking at people around the table. And that comes up even more when you have fewer players at the table, because there's not a lot of times for people to disengage and kind of like doom scroll on their phone or whatever, around or cross talk and things like that. And when they're more focused all the time, that takes more attention, and that takes more engagement, which is great, and we want it. But it takes more attention, and that does sort of like, it's more of a tax on a person's battery as far as like their ability to focus on stuff. So running shorter sessions will be helpful for that. Consider reducing the amount of combat in your games for more exploration and social scenes and challenges. Yeah, the lack of that fourth cornerstone PC covering that role is mostly felt in combat. That's where you'll feel it the most. So if you run a game that already runs faster, that means they're naturally taking on more combats than you might anticipate between long rests. So you might want to run less combat in general, or what will feel like less combat in your prep, but will, as far as at the table, feel maybe consistently like the same amount of combat. You'll just be doing more combats because they go faster. A smaller group means that everyone can be involved in every scene, which I think has been mostly the key thing, is that most scenes involve 2 players, at least 2 to 3 players. There are occasional times where people split off in their singles, and everybody splits up and you're doing 3 things at once. That does happen, but more often than not, you're going to have, if the party ever splits up, it's going to be two PCs in one scene and then 1 PC in the other. That's generally how they tend to split up. Which means that you can have a scene where it's just these 2 player characters talking to each other sometimes, if they don't really have a strong idea of what they're doing. They can just be talking about some stuff, or getting into some trouble, doing some shenanigans, and then you can have one player over here who's actually going and doing like real work. Being like, oh, I need to go to the library to research whatever this is. The Star of Aventine. I don't know what that is, so I'm going to go to the library and research it. And the other 2 are like, well, we don't really have any plans, so we're going to go to the market and pick up on some supplies. And then they'll be like, oh, here's a cookie shop keeper you can talk to for a little bit. So it makes it feel like you guys are still doing anything, and maybe you can learn some information about something else that's going on, or the opportunity to ask a question to somebody else, or run into a recurring NPC or something like that. Because it's basically, even if one character sneaks off for whatever reason, the other 2 should be doing something. And most of that time, it's just going to be talking to each other if they don't have any big plans. When you shunt it down to only having 3 players, there's very few do-nothing scenes where players in your game where you have nothing to do. That doesn't happen very often. You don't need to rely on combats as much to create scenes where every player is present and engaged, because when you only have 3 players, like I said, a social scene, it's very easy to engage all 3 players. Like I said, you only have 1 or 2 NPCs that you're running in most social scenes. You can be like, all you gotta do is ask each different player 1 question and focus in on them. So it's not just like, oh, the face walks forward and the 2 others kind of like zoom off into the silhouette into the background. Like, nope, you engage all 3. If you're all 3 here, you're all 3 talking, because that's how kind of real life works. Because it would be super weird if you and your friends walked up to somebody and one of your friends started talking to them, and then you just had your 3 friends just kind of like stand behind you like, and not say anything. That would be very weird and intimidating and off-putting. They wouldn't, especially if you were like highly armed and armored. That person would probably not want to talk to you. You might do well at intimidation checks, but probably not so great at persuasion checks. So yeah, you don't need to rely on combats as much to have scenes where everybody's engaged. That's mostly what I want to talk about. Let's talk about some final notes here, and I want to reiterate sort of like the core efficiencies that when you're running with 3 players instead of 4 to 8 players, you're going to have improved pacing, lots more focus from the players, significantly more engagement from your players. Scheduling becomes easier, and you're going to come up with a lot more creativity tactically, whether that's an exploration challenge or social obstacle that they need to get past, or even combat where it's just like we're just missing one of the key roles. All that stuff's going to spur a lot more creativity in the play, which is what I don't know about you, but that's definitely what I want out of the game, and what I want for my players as well. And I want to remind you guys that the magic number is kind of a functional choice. It's not really like Dogma. It's not like you should never run for more than 3 players. It's like, no, I just find that 3 players is consistently the best number to run for, and it's not 4, which is kind of the core assumption. So I would invite you as dungeon masters or game masters of whatever game, whether that's D&D or another game, to experiment with running groups of 3 players and share those stories. I think that it's like smaller tables have bigger tales to tell. That has been my experience. If I really wanted to sum this all up in one thing, I'd be that smaller tables have bigger tales to tell. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. We got a little bit of time. We could do see, you guys want to do some mapping? We can map out a hex real quick. We're a little bit bad. I mean, we're right on schedule to knock out, but let's do a little hex just for fun. We did some of this yesterday, so if you missed that stream, I actually did a stream over on Twitch. I was going to do it on my second channel as well, but for some reason I had forgotten to tell the second channel that, hey, I want to stream on this YouTube channel. So it's got a 24-hour block on it, which should be resolved about now, but I wasn't able to stream it there. So let's do that. Let's pull up our thing. So anyways, we worked on this a little bit and then answered some questions. Reddit does this like weekly question thing for D&D on the D&D subreddit, as well as the behind the tables subreddit, which is, or not behind the tables, behind the screen subreddit, which is for dungeon masters. And so taking a look at that and offering advice in those little aspects. Let me pull this up. I think this is the file I'm looking for, right? It surely is. Perfect. Now what I need to do, I can close that out. Good there. I need to open up oh no, not that. What are you doing? Don't be crazy. All right. I need to open up my hex document. And then we can do it. Hex stocking, here we go, for our points of interest. Perfect, we can do that. And then let's need some dice as well. Digital dice. I guess we can go ahead and share that, why not? Here, I guess I can share both. Go full screen. There you go. I know my fat head's in the way. We're just gonna have to deal with it. I can't show. Can have it perfectly set up. All right. So we've done quite a bit of this map already. As you can see, it's super huge, and this is where we are currently playing in our campaign. Campaign I'm running. Just zoomed out a little bit. All right. So where are we at? I think we're up here. So these should be pretty easy to go through because these are all wilderness hexes. We're going to be doing this hex right here. They're all wilderness hexes, so there's less likely there's going to be a point of interest here. There's only a 1 in 6, or in water hexes like this one, a 1 in 10 chance that there's going to be a point of interest here. So most of the trackless wilderness is just kind of empty. It's just kind of the challenge of getting from one place to another. Which is why I differentiate hex crawling versus overland travel. Overland travel is just like the important thing is getting to point B. Like doing some sort of exploration through, or hex crawling exploration is like you're looking for a thing and you don't really know where it is. This is like trying to find the ancient ruins in the jungle. You're like, yeah, kind of just searching the jungle is the adventure, as opposed to being like, oh, we know where the ruins are, we're just going straight there. Then I would use overland travel rules rather than go hex by hex trying to crawl through there. Different intent. All right. So, up, get a D10. Oh, well, we're immediately going to get a point of interest, I guess. I rolled a 3, and that's going to be, let's get our stamp. It's going to be a religious site. Boop. So we know that that's going to be APL 05 through 10. And I put this on text, so not secret notes. Need to go to the other tab. There we go, secret notes, so it doesn't show up on the map. Bang. Do we need to do any more? We'll just say it's pretty. I guess we can do one. All right, so we need a D6. Find out how old this thing is. All right, so it's recent. I can do the full meal deal. Recent. 3 and 4. So a Chantry Hermitage, or a charity, almshouse, hospital, orphanage, or school. Usually I roll twice and see if I can combine them or just pick one of them. Can we combine something here? It might be interested to do like maybe like an isolated hospital kind of thing. That might be interesting. Like, what if it was like a... If we went with hospital in the modern sense and not like the more medieval hospital. Well, what if it was a hospital in the modern sense for only a very specific isolated holy person? It could be interesting. I feel like that answers, like, that's a super big question. Is like, why is this person out here is a big question. And the answer is, I don't know right now. But they might need to talk to somebody who is a religious doctor at some point. Let's see. We're going to put that. I'll put religious site down the bottom. I'm sure I will remember that, but sometimes I need to leave notes for myself. Not write notes. Religious site. Perfect. Alright, is there going to be a settlement here? Roll the bones. I rolled a 4. Monster thing. This place is occupied by monsters. Thing. So I'm thinking this recent isolated Chantry funded hospital. My thought is that this is, so a Chantry is usually like funded by a noble or somebody, or merchant, somebody of wealth, funds basically. In the typical thing, you fund a Chantry, which is just like, hey, I hire a priest to basically pray for my soul. Sometimes it's done when you're alive, but usually it's done when you're dead. But now if it's like a hospital, like, oh, maybe there's like somebody here who's really sick but very wealthy, and they basically have somebody be their own personal church and hospital for this person. But this place is occupied by monsters. Why? What's going on with that? I don't know. And I don't need to know right now. That's for me to determine if the players ever get near this hex, which they may or may not do. We keep my DMing at this stage because we're doing top down, so this is big world building stuff. So we need to keep it as big enough that it gives us some interesting questions to ask ourselves as a dungeon master, to ask myself as a dungeon master, but give myself lots of room to play with. So like whenever they get down there, I can make that be a lot of different things. Is it the monster the person that the person's taking care of? Is it not? Is it the monster the priest? Is the monster part of the hospital? Are they doing something monstrous at the hospital? Maybe that's what the thing is. They're celestial blood infusions or some sort of like weird transfusions, doing weird stuff like that. Ooh. Creepy. That's a totally different vibe than I was originally going for. But that would be a very fun adventure site. And then we're going to continue on. Alright, nothing there. Nope, something here. Apparently we're going to roll all ones today. Alright, we got number 9. Double cheeseburger. Wait, nope. Wrong number 9. Number 9 is an omen, info, or warning sign. We're just going to leave that for right now. So it's basically just some sort of navigation sign, the sign that points you to something that's going on in the world. Sometimes it's like a warning sign, you know, beware, dragons be here kind of thing. Or, you know, a nice like hangman's tree, some sort of omen that's happened here, some sort of information. It's just like, hey, you come across a thing that tells you about a thing. And for that, we do our little bell icon. Bing! Hey, there's something here. I don't know why I'm rolling that. 3, 6, 3. Remember, we have to go to 1. Haven't done it yet. Alright, nothing there. That's more like the rolls I was expecting. Alright, nothing there. It's dry land. Nothing there. Something right here. So the difference between the D6 and D10 is whether it's on the water or not. There's more likely to be points of interest on dry land than in the water. I feel like that should be somewhat self-evident. D&D is a game that's mostly focused on, you know, things that happen above or underground, and fewer things that happen above and under the sea. It will also make your life a lot easier if you don't have as many aquatic adventuring locations. And I know that DM and the campaign that we're playing of has been feeling that for sure. Is with a ton of our campaign, which had set out to be like a maritime campaign, but has ended up being like mostly an underwater campaign, which is a very different vibe. All right, they're all Nate, right? Okay. They've got an isolated homestead. We could do isolated homestead. Why not? This is a person, and at this level, a person plus a group of people who are kind of living off by themselves. You know, old man Pritchard who lives on the edge of town, kind of thing. Kind of a curmudgeon, kind of misanthrope. All right, let's find out what kind of thing we're dealing with. 4, natural. I'm pretty sure that's just beast. So yeah, I know for certain that is beast. Done. All right. Let's roll a d6. Got a bestial theme. And I rolled a 3. So some sort of hermit or pariah. Let's roll a d20. On high, it'll be pariah. Alright, so we've got a... Can't even do this. Bestial pariah's isolated homestead. If we can go ahead and do the occupation. Each one empty. Occupation, none. So this person is truly out there by themselves. There's no sort of like little settlement around them. So if we have some sort of bestial pariah isolated homestead, the likelihood is we can interpret that as being some sort of were creature. Pretty easy way to do that. Or if we truly wanted to go bestial, we could really do something something that's been split off from its herd, like an actual animal. If we wanted to do that, let's see what that would look like. 5, and we got set our filters to beasts. That's hard to do because there are not a lot of high level beasts. We're already in an area that we're kind of knocking it out. We are in the water though, right? Jeez. Alright, so we could go hunter shark. That's a lot of hunter sharks though. Yeah, you're gonna have a lot of stuff that's down here. I can try to do aquatic theme or coastal. See if that pulls up anything that's gonna be useful for us. A little bit more useful for us. Plesiosaurus. If I wanted 8 of them. Man, I really do not like the 2024 math. It really blows everything up in a way that's not great. But we could have some giant sharks. Now, I did come across some giant sharks last time. So we could do that. Let's see. We're next to some other hexes. We're already next to kind of watery hexes. So we could do, if we wanted to do crocodile. I could also just like level up a giant octopus if I wanted to. Which might be more fun. Or some sort of even larger crab. If I wanted to. We can decide whether we like that or if we want to go with a shapeshifter. Ooh, having an aquatic shapeshifter, that's what we should do. As we should do, what is it? Like a where, I'm gonna have to take the filters off. Yeah, like a werebear, that's what I'm thinking. If we did werebear, but we chopped it up and made it like a were shark instead. It'd be very interesting. Yeah, let's go with that. We're gonna have a were shark, but we're gonna reskin that as a werebear. Reskin the werebear. Obviously, they're a pariah, as they're a were creature. Super easy. Already have something new, fun, and different that players would probably never have seen before. Alright, nothing there. I was just thinking, but we have come across a were shark in the campaign I'm playing in. Like I said, very heavily maritime focused. And it was sort of fighting, like, this is going to show my age, like fighting one of the old street sharks. Which was fun. Who really pissed off our barbarian. And our barbarian, even though got bit multiple times, did not end up getting lycanthropy, made their con save every time, and instead ended up killing that guy. Which was a good payoff for their sort of like personal beef with that character. Well, that is an entire hex. There's not much in that hex, but we ended up with, there's going to be this weird religious site. Oh my gosh, why did it not save my notes? We did the religious site. Why did it not save my notes? No! Sometimes it's like that. I had the wrong thing selected. Alright, well, let's fix that real quick. So, so it's basically like, was it chantry? Occupy monsters. That's pretty. Looking like it. Like we said, there could be all sorts of like weird stuff. This almost feels like the setup like a Resident Evil game, having this sort of church-funded hospital, or this personal-funded like religious hospital here. That's only there for them, and they're using monsters to prolong their life or something like that. That very much feels like a Resident Evil game. That does feel like the plot of a Resident Evil game. Very much so. But yeah, that was everything that we wanted to do today. I want to thank you guys for hanging out. Hey, if you like this sort of stuff, you can always give a like on the video and subscribe if you want to see more of this stuff. We got more videos. We got the website. We do the streaming over on Twitch on the very occasionally. So if you want to check me out on Twitch, you can do that as well. Like I said, we streamed there last night. Did more of this map, so if you like this mapping stuff, we did some of that over here. Though usually this YouTube thing. You can check that out. I play video games over there sometimes and do some other stuff. So you can check that out. It's all Red Ragged Fiend. Wherever you go, it's always the same me. And yeah, I think that's about it. Thanks for hanging out with me, guys. This is always fun. Well, we'll do this again next time. Probably next week. Sure, I'll come up with something to stream next week, assuming I'm still feel good, or feel well, I should say. My partner is feeling a little under the weather, so hopefully I don't contract whatever they have. So, until then, have good games. Try playing with only 3 players at the table. See how it goes. A good thing to do, try to jump in. Like if you have, if you run for a larger group and you have a bunch of people out, maybe try just running a one-shot for like 3 players and see how it goes. See if you can tell the big difference in it. I think that you will. You will. Like I said, I think that smaller tables tend to tell bigger stories. So, try it out. Let me know how your experience with it. If you have experience running for larger tables or a different number of players do you like better at your table, go ahead and drop those down in the comments below. We'll take a look at them. Until then, have a good one, and I'll see you guys later. All right? Bye.